en el ojo del reptil. time or complexity shows no sign of slowing down. In fact, within the fabric of our own lives, we can almost daily, hourly, by the minute, feel it speeding up, taking hold. It's a cliche that time is moving faster and faster, a cliche of the mass media. But I want to suggest that this is not a perceptual illusion or a cultural mirage, that this is actually happening to the space-time matrix, that time is in fact speeding up, that history in which we are embedded because our life of 50 to 80 years is so ephemeral on a scale of 10 to 15,000 years. But nevertheless, history is a state of incredible destabilization. It's a chaostrophe in the process of happening. It begins with animals kept in balance by natural selection, and it ends with a global internet of electronic information transfer and a language-using species hurling its instruments toward the stars. There is no reason for us to suppose that this process of acceleration is ever going to slow down or be deflected. It has been a law of nature from the very beginning of nature that this acceleration was built in. What poses a problem to us as thinking individuals is that the speed of involution toward concrescence is now so great that we can feel the tug of it within the confines of our own lives. There has been more change since 1960 than in the previous several thousand years. There has been more change since 1992 than in the previous 1,000 years. Change is accelerating. Invention, connection, adumbration of ideas, mathematical algorithms, connectivity of people, social systems, this is all accelerating furiously and under the control of no one. Not the Catholic Church, the Communist Party, the IMF, no one is in charge of this process. This is what makes history so interesting. It's a runaway freight train on a dark and stormy night. That the critical catalyst propelling us out of the slowly evolving hominid line and caused us to take an orthogonal right-hand turn into culture, language, art, yearning, probably was the inclusion of psychedelic plants in our diet during that episodic moment when we went from being fruitarian canopy dwellers to omnivorous pack-hunting creatures of the grassland. And it was the inclusion of psilocybin in our grassland diet that caused us to discover that there is a mind, and you can perturb it. I mean, think about, I don't think you could discover consciousness if you didn't perturb it, because as Marshall McLuhan said, whoever discovered water, it certainly wasn't a fish. Well, we are fish swimming in consciousness, and yet we know it's there. Well, the reason we know it's there is because if you perturb it, then you see it. And you perturb it by perturbing the engine which generates it, which is the mind-brain system resting behind your eyebrows. If you swap out the ordinary chemicals that are running that system in an invisible fashion, then you see it's like dropping ink into a bowl of clear water. Suddenly the convection currents operating in the clear water become visible because you see the particles of ink tracing out the previously invisible dynamics of the standing water. The mind is precisely like that, and the psychedelic is like a dye marker being dropped into this aqueous system, and then you say, all institutions attain a certain momentum toward the preservation of their own vested interests. And science, and the handmaiden of science, which is modern technocratic government, have created a number of cultural institutions that have a friction with the reemergence of the spirit. First and foremost is the notion of the public. The public is this weird idea that was generated in the wake of the printing press, that there were vast numbers of people who could be treated atomistically. They didn't have to be thought of as individuals. They could be thought of as various classes, masses of people to be manipulated. And if you could sell the public on the idea of democracy, which is another one of these atomistic notions. The notion of democracy is that for us all to get together and have it work, we have to assume that we're all alike, see? So we each have a vote, and then you may be tall, you may be short, you may be rich, you may be poor, you may be black, you may be white, but that doesn't matter. We'll give everybody this charge, one vote, and then we'll see how these populations work themselves out. What they don't tell you is that at the same time that you build this definition of the citizen, you also build the institutions which subvert the citizen. So the citizen is not free to act out and express the wishes of the citizen. The citizen is a consumer of ideological models that are sold to the citizen through agencies of mass propaganda. So there's this peculiar playing off of one against the other. In the meantime, what has also been happening is the institutions of language, which previously were pretty much left to develop on their own, and that was the situation well into the 19th century. Through the power of the printing press, the evolution of language also became something under the control of these institutions, and they very quickly have replaced whatever reality may have been impinging into the lives of the citizens with concepts. Concepts replace reality. You come into the world with a blank slate, and everything is what William James called a blooming, buzzing confusion. Well, then one by one you isolate phenomena in this confusion and you name it. Once a sector of reality has been named, it stays still. It ceases to behave the way it would behave for itself. It begins to behave syntactically because it has been changed into a linguistic object. When things syntactically, they are either subjects or objects, or the syntactical machinery which relates these two together. In that case, materialism, dualism, projection of authenticity beyond the self are all reinforced. So these are the factors which have impeded the spirit. Into this comes the psychedelic experience. It has a tremendous force to revivify the spirit, particularly because it is not an ideology. It is not something someone figured out. It is an experience. And this is important to bear in mind. It horrifies me, I'm sure you've heard me say it, to think of someone going from birth to the grave without ever coming tangential to the psychedelic experience. It's like going from the birth to the grave without ever discovering sex. It means that you died as a pre-adolescent. You know, you never really came into your birthright. And we have been infantilized by our cultural institutions to accept the notion of ourselves as citizens, consuming these regurgitated scientific models, which are then hashed through by Madison Avenue and then handed down to us by the organs of mass culture. And this is supposed to be what we anchor our lives on. It's no wonder that drug abuse, child abuse, self-abuse is rampant in this society, because it all has been taken away from us. You may read 1984 and think, well, thank God it isn't that bad yet. Well, the only difference between us and 1984 is we dress better.
What civilization is 6 billion people trying to make themselves happy by standing on each other's shoulders and kicking each other's teeth in. It's not a pleasant situation. And yet, you can stand back and look at this planet and see that we have the money, the power, the medical understanding, the scientific know-how, the love, and the community to produce a kind of human paradise. But we are led by the least among us, the least intelligent, the least noble, the least visionary. We're led by the least among us, and we do not
The real issue is, what kind of mental worlds shall people inhabit? What kinds of hope shall be permitted? What kind of value systems shall be allowed? And the value systems that aggrandize the possession of things, the tearing up of the earth, competition, classism, racism, sexism have led us to the brink of catastrophe. Now, I think we have to abandon Western cultural values and return to the deeper wisdom of the body in connection with the plants. That's the seamless web that leads us back into the heart of nature. And if we can do this, then this very narrow neck of cultural crisis can be navigated. Very little of the past can be saved. The architectonics, the machines, the systems of monetary exchange and propaganda, the silly religions, the asinine aesthetic canons, very little of that can be saved. But what can be saved is the sense of love and caring and mutuality that we all put into and take from the human enterprise. You know, there's a Grateful Dead song that says, you can't go back and you can't stand still. If the thunder don't get you, then the lightning will. And we now hold, through the possession of these psychedelics, catalysts for the human imagination of sufficient power that if we use them, we can deconstruct the lethal vehicle that is carrying us toward the brink of apocalypse. We can deconstruct that vehicle and redesign it into a kind of starship that would carry us and our children out into the broad, starry galaxy we know to be waiting us. But it's a cultural test. Nature is pitiless. Intelligence is a grand experiment upon which a great deal has been risked. But if it proves inadequate, nature will cover it over with the same kind of cool impunity that she covered over the dinosaurs and the trilobites and the crossopterygian fishes and all those other folks who came before. So what we must do, I think, is see our future.
And the internet introduces everybody, no matter how weird, no matter how marginalized, no matter how peculiar, to the fact that there are others like you. There are others like you. Find the others. Make common cause. Realize that it's the deals you cut and the friends you make that determine where you're going to be standing when the flash hits. I mean, that's just obvious. And the cultural game is a game of uniformitarianism. Cultural myths are that we are all alike. We Americans, each created equal. It's a necessary truth to do political business, but it is not the truth. The truth is that you are not created equal today. Leave alone any comparison with anybody else. You are not the person you were yesterday, nor the person you will be next week. What is an observation like that? What shadow does it cast in a world of all people are created equal? So culture plays a game of simplification. If you can make people think alike, They will buy alike. They will worship alike. And if, politics demands it, they will kill alike. So the uniformitarian agenda of culture is not an agenda friendly to you or to me or to any other individual. And if you start out from that point of view, you will soon realize that culture is not your friend. Culture is not your friend. If you define yourself as a member of a group, of any group, know that that is a gross simplification, and that everything about you that is interesting and unique is betrayed by defining yourself in that way. Most racism is practiced by people of the race that they are.
And what's your feeling when I say drugs?
Well, drugs is a word which has polluted the well of language. Part of the reason we have a drug problem is because we don't have an intelligent language to talk about substances, plants, psychedelic states of mind, sedative states of mind, states of amphetamine excitation. We can't make sense of the problem and the opportunities offered by substances unless we clean up our language. Drugs is a word that's been used by governments to make it impossible to think creatively about the problem of substances and abuse and availability and so forth and so on.
In the minds of the people, the word drugs, which was once used as healing medications, and still drug companies that make, Tylenol are considered very legitimate.
Well, so it's a kind of a paradox, isn't it? Drugs mean that which cures us and the greatest social problem of the generation. So there, right there, you see the schizophrenia involved in thinking about drugs. Apparently there are good drugs sanctioned by science and medicine, and bad drugs used by brown people in strange rites and growing in unusual plants in distant parts of the world. This kind of thinking, because it's naive, leads, of course, to social problems and bad politics and bad social policy.
Your stance has been to at least look for what you call those strange plants and strange substances in strange places. You originally were a botanist, or you still are.
Yes, and from the time I was very young, I was fascinated with the idea of extremely dramatic changes in consciousness from which one recovers after a few hours, induced by plants. And I discovered through the writing of Aldous Huxley and other people that this was a worldwide religious and cultural phenomenon that my own Catholic middle-class upbringing had completely overlooked and denied, and I've been fascinated with it ever since. You know, it's a bit like sexuality. It's something which the Calvinist intellect would just prefer didn't exist, but in fact, the phenomenon of being human beings in animal bodies with a relationship to nature makes it important for us to address these altered states of consciousness, and the plants, the substances, and the cultural institutions that come into being around these things.
Your thesis in many books has been that these substances have had a far greater influence on culture, and still have and will have, than most people would like to accept or like to see.
Yes, I mean, to my mind, human history is the story of one substance after another distorting or transforming human values and society. A perfect example would be sugar. Most people don't even think of sugar as a drug, and yet we may think cocaine distorted moral and political values in Latin America, but sugar brought back slavery. Slavery actually died with the Roman Empire. Nobody worked agricultural products with slaves in the Middle Ages. It wasn't until the early 1400s that the Portuguese began producing sugar, and they used up Jews and prisoners. And so then they started buying human beings from Arab traders. And the Pope was in on the deal, and everybody was in on the deal. I mean, this is drug corruption of the central institutions of society on a massive scale.
But that has gone on till our days. We have alcohol, we have tobacco.
Well, this is my very point, that every society chooses a small number of substances, no matter how toxic, and enshrines them in its cultural values, then demonizes all other substances, and uses and then persecutes and launches witch hunts against those users whenever some political pretext requires witch hunts and persecutions. So it's an old game, and it's been played in many places. Hopefully, part of the advancement of society toward ideas of universal human rights and that sort of thing, it certainly must include the idea of the universal human right to take responsibility for and to alter your own state of consciousness as you see fit. I don't think we can even pretend that we are on the edge of a civilized dialogue until we grant that people's minds, like their bodies, must be a domain free from government control. In American law, we have the notion of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If the pursuit of happiness means anything, it must mean the right to use and experiment with substances and plants.
But do we need, say, more research, or do we know all we need to know about entheogens or hallucinogens?
No, we need endless amounts of research. The fact that these things have been illegal in most countries for 50 years means there is a huge lag in understanding the impact of these things on human beings. How many people have taken MDMA, and yet MDMA has not been thoroughly studied by science? How many people have smoked DMT? Same thing. In a way, by making these drugs illegal, we're setting ourselves up for a potential catastrophe someday when some side effect is overlooked because the drugs were not rationally reviewed with an eye not toward keeping them out of the hands of the public, but with an eye toward public safety and educating the public in safe use of these things.
The state should not, in the matter of drugs, any more than in the matter of sex, act as the secret agent for the agenda of the church. And that's what's happening. People want to stimulate themselves. They want to explore their consciousness. They want to sedate themselves. Who are we to stand in their way with a moral ideology and the long, heavy arm of the law to interfere with that? It distorts civilized values. But that's the bottom line. Drug repression distorts civilized values and political discourse.
Many people emphasize the bad effects of using, LSD, DMT. Do you think there are positive effects in general, and are there positive effects that are yet to be discovered?
Well, yes. Anyone who has actually been around people using psychedelics know they have tremendous therapeutic potential, tremendous potential to launch people into confrontations with aspects of their personality or their history that they are in denial of. The people who hold that these psychedelic substances have no application have very little actual personal experience with them. It's the old story of my mind is made up, don't confuse me with facts.
Would psychology be further ahead? Would you have learned more about the way the human mind works on itself in an interaction with others if the research, say, on the use of LSD or ibogaine or many of these substances would have proceeded in an orderly and what you could call scientific way?
Yes, I think it's a great tragedy of 20th century science that the original excitement about exploring consciousness and mental illness generated by the discovery of LSD gave way to establishment paranoia and repression of drug-using populations. The excitement in psychology when LSD was first introduced was like the excitement in the physics community when the atom was smashed, and everybody thought, well, now we'll understand mental illness, schizophrenia, the memory, so forth and so on. And instead, the government lost its nerve because it saw that these substances have a potential for deprogramming people to institutional values. And that was so terrifying that all the promise for mental illness and creativity studies and so forth and so on was sacrificed to institutional paranoia about the fact that drugs might actually cause people to wake up to some of the abuses and scams that were being run by late modernism and capitalism.
Clear. Thank you, Terence.
Thank you.
The plant is Salvia divinorum. Salvia divinorum, which some of you who are real mavens of this stuff know it. It's been in the books for 30 years. The problem was nobody knew how to get off. And so it was always carried in these lists as suspect hallucinogen. The thing is, any scientist confronted with a plant where somebody says it's a hallucinogen will test to see if it's an alkaloid. All hallucinogens, almost all, are alkaloids. So Salvia divinorum, negative for alkaloids. Doesn't matter. It has a new, unknown compound in it, now known, salvorine alpha. And the interesting thing about salvorine alpha is we have in this country what's called a structural near relatives or cogener law, which says if a compound is a structural near relative, isomer, enantiomer, or stereoisomer of an illegal compound, then it too can be made illegal. Salvia divinorum doesn't fit this description. That means that in order to make this stuff illegal, the government will have to present medical data showing there is something wrong with it. And at this stage, nobody on earth knows the real pharmacological parameters of this compound.
So here's the deal. You can grow this plant in a window box, in your apartment, in your backyard. It looks like Joe Plant. There is nothing particularly distinguishing about this plant. And if you have 3 or 4 cuttings, in 6 or 7 months you will have more than you know what to do with. And then I'll just describe how I do it. I'm slightly chicken shit to do the pure compound, which, by the way, you do 300 micrograms. Understand that what that looks like is a grain of salt. A small grain of salt is a human effective dose. It comes on so fast that you have no impression of it coming on at all. You do it, and then after a while you notice that for a long time you have been staring at something incomprehensible. Well, here's how I recommend that you do it while we get the chemical thing sorted out, because the chemical, it could be dangerous. It would be very easy to overdose by a factor of 10, 20, 30, and you would still just be doing a smidgen. So I say, let's honor the plants. Let's not hand the government a bunch of casualties that it can cluck over and put on national TV, you know, the bibble, 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 bibble show. Let's use the plant, and the way you do it is you grow up a batch of this stuff and get between 15 and 20 leaves. Remove the mid-vein with your fingernail just to lower the mass. Fold it all into a little pile. Put it in your mouth, and 20 leaves is a whopping mouthful. So basically, as much as you can get in your mouth. Put it in your mouth, lie down in silent darkness, and squeeze this stuff with your jaws. Tastes like, it's horrible. It's not as bad as ayahuasca, but it's horrible. But you could acquire a taste for it. So lie down in darkness where you can see a digital watch. One of these red flashing jobs like a Kmart deal. And then let it, don't swallow it, but just squeeze it and masticate it. At 15 minutes, by the clock, spit it out into a bowl or a Kleenex or something, and then just lie there. Lie still in the darkness with your eyes closed and look, and this is almost the key empowerment, though it's idiotic. People fail to do it. Look at the back of your eyelids with the expectation of seeing something. And when you do that, after just 3 or 4 minutes, there will be what we professionals call streaming, which means amoeboid lights of after-image colors, the chartreuse and purple flowing by. And about 3 minutes after that, it will deepen very, very quickly into extraordinarily bizarre, dare we say it, fairly DMT-like hallucinations. And it builds fast. I mean, so fast that there is this wonderful moment in it where you actually know real fear, which shows you that it's working. I mean, I really believe if you take a psychedelic and you're not afraid you did too much, you didn't do enough. The experience then will unfold over about 45 minutes. And just lie there and look, and it is beautiful. It is beautiful. I mean, I'm a connoisseur of hallucination, and the beautiful, these deep indigo blues, these cerulean blues against blackness that are like neon, and these amorphous Yves Tanguy kind of shapes that are moving and transforming themselves. I mean, I was amazed. I couldn't believe it. I was saying, my God, this is legal. This is legal. And it's working. And it's working. And I am the hardest of the hard heads. I mean, I know people say, you know, here's Tagetes lucidum, this'll get you off, here's this, smoke this, knick-a-nick, this, something. No, it doesn't. It's not like that. These things are rare. But this one works, and I commend it to your attention and your friends' attention and anyone with shamanic intent. As I say, it's perfectly legal to possess, advocate, the whole bit, yes. Salvia. It's in the genus Salvia. That's the mint family. Sacred to pagans for millennia. Salvia, S-A-L-V-I-A. And then Divinorum, D-I-V-I-N-O-R-U-M. The diviner's mint. Well, yes, let me say something about this that's very interesting. Pardon me?
What's its common name?
Well, that's what I was going to talk about. It's native from Mexico, so it has no common name in English. In Spanish, it has a very interesting common name. It's called Ojos de la Pastora. Now, the eyes of the shepherdess. What a strange name. Think about it for a moment. First of all, notice that in Christian iconography, there are no shepherdesses. Period. Not one. We got shepherds. You got your shepherds there, Christmas. Not shepherdess? No. So it's called Ojos de la Pastora. Well, then the anthropologist who studied this, Brett Blosser, to whom we all owe a great debt, hail Brett, naturally, these people are Tzotzil and Sotil. They're in the mountains of Oaxaca. And so he said to them, well, yes, Ojos de la Pastora, very interesting, but what do you call it in your language? What do you call it in Tzotzil? And they said, well, we have no name for it in our language. This is very, very interesting. And if any of you have any thoughts or want to work on this, it's inconceivable if these people had used this for centuries that they would not have a local Tzotzil name for it. So he said, why don't you have a name for it? And they said, because our grandfathers were the first to use it. And this, we do not know what to make of it, because Salvia divinorum is known only from this very indemnified locality in the Sierra Mazateca. Where did it come from? Has it always been there? But these Indians only discovered it 200 years ago? Did it come from somewhere else? And if so, where? Because it's never been located anywhere else on the planet. So this is a great puzzlement. And I think if we move fast enough, we psychedelicos, we pagans, we neuronauts, we magicians, if we move fast enough, this will just be moot. And this is a far more powerful thing than cannabis. I mean, not if you've never smoked cannabis and then you sit down and smoke the best aff there is. But as we all know, after a while, cannabis loses its ability to really catapult you into the unspeakable. The Salvia divinorum, every time I have taken it, it's gotten better and stronger and weirder. So I think it is sent from the goddess at this time. Eyes of the shepherdess, these are the eyes we should be looking through.
Terence Mckenna, un etnobotánico que estudió chamanismo en el Amazonas. Según McKenna, para prepararse para una vida futura en la que viviremos cargados en ordenadores, antes debemos prepararnos mentalmente. Y la mejor forma de hacerlo es mediante el uso de drogas psicodélicas.
En
cierto sentido, esta crisis histórica o esta singularidad a la que nos acercamos es una transición entre un mundo de bajo nivel dimensional, solo 2 y 3, a un mundo de 4, 5 y 6 dimensiones. Y eso es lo que creo que sucede en un cerebro humano bajo la influencia de las drogas psicodélicas. Así que, en cierto modo, la mejor forma de prepararse para la singularidad es disolver y reconstruir repetidamente la personalidad de uno a través del uso de sustancias psicodélicas. Esta es una de las nuevas drogas psicodélicas más interesantes del mundo. Es la salvia divinorum, la planta que dará forma a las próximas décadas del nuevo milenio. Esto es un cóleo. Resulta irónico que esta planta, que lleva muchas generaciones en nuestras cocinas, ventanas y arriates, contenga algunos de los elementos psicodélicos más potentes conocidos. Esta planta no es interesante como droga, pero es realmente extraña. Siempre tomo drogas al estilo de los chamanes. Por la noche, solo y a ser posible en la naturaleza. Entonces observo. Presto mucha atención. Utilizo mi mente como un medio para llevar a cabo observaciones sobre la unión del espíritu, mi personalidad y la materia física de la sustancia que he ingerido. Ninguna experiencia humana es más parecida a la singularidad que la producida por las drogas psicodélicas. Se trata de una anticipación microscópica de un evento macroscópico que acontecerá en el futuro. Cuando una persona consume drogas psicodélicas, sufre una especie de mini-apocalipsis, una mini-revelación que lo prepara para ese gran acontecimiento de la historia.
The culture has all the answers, you know. You want to know where people came from? Well, when the sky god got out of his canoe at first waterfall and took the leap, then we, the true people, appeared like ants, and we've been living here ever since. Oh, huh. Gee, thanks. I'm glad I asked. You know, this is what culture does for you. But now technology throws a curve, and the curve is that we live so long that we figure out what a scam this is. We figure out that what you're supposed to work for isn't worth having. We figure out that our politicians are buffoons. We figure out that professional scientists are reputation-building, grab-tailing weasels. We discover that all organizations are corrupted by ambition. We figure it out. Well, then, as intellectuals, and anybody who figures it out is an intellectual, believe me, because they're slinging the programming to push you the other way. So then intellectuals, defined as people who figure it out,
catalysts to say what has never been said, to see what has never been seen.
to draw, paint, sing, sculpt, dance, and act what has never before been done, to push the envelope of creativity and language. And what's really important is, I call it the felt presence of direct experience, which is a fancy term which just simply means we have to stop consuming our culture. We have to create culture. Don't watch TV. Don't read magazines. Don't even listen to NPR. Create your own road show. The nexus of space and time where you are now is the most immediate sector of your universe. And if you're worrying about Michael Jackson or Bill Clinton or somebody else, then you are disempowered. You're giving it all away to icons. Icons which are maintained by an electronic media, so that you want to dress like X or have lips like Y or something. This is shit-brained, this kind of thinking. That is all cultural diversion, and what is real is you and